Hello, everyone. This is Robin. So, in this segment, we are going to talk about routines. Now, routines might not be very glamorous or exciting, but something that we have come upon in our research on resiliency is that routines are very important, especially in seasons of uncertainty or in seasons of challenging times. Now, I appreciate that we are creatures that appreciate our freedoms. And it was amazing to me when I came upon this writing by an author by the name of Jacko Willing, who wrote about this idea as a former Navy SEAL that discipline equals freedom. And what he said was when you become a master of your routine, then you'll have time to do the things that matter most. You'll have the time to feel how you want to feel. So I'm really excited to explore this idea about routines because I think there's a lot of value add here for us as caregivers. So first and foremost, I think it's important to recognize that routines, we're not talking about perfection. I want you to be present in your day. I don't need you to be perfect when it comes to routine. And when we think about a routine, what we know is that it helps balance the mental load. So, what we mean by that is not having a sense of what's next or what matters most. That creates a big sense of overwhelm. And at the end of the day, when you're being a caregiver, you want to simplify things as much as possible. So creating some structure and some routine actually helps with the management of stress. It helps with emotional regulation. Now, if you're anything like me, I love myself some lists. I love to have lists. I like to be in order because at the end of the day, I know it gives me a sense of balance. This helps me make sure I'm making what matters most matter most. I like to be organized, but I use it really as a coping strategy. It's how I navigate the ebbs and flows of my world and my ecosystem that I'm part of. So schedules are really important. So we know that they have value, but I also know that maintaining a schedule is very challenging. So to help us unpack why this is so challenging, I first want to put forward this idea about the difference between motivation and discipline. Now, motivation is the feeling, it's the spark. It's that get excited about this will be interesting or this will be amazing. Motivation gives us ideas, but discipline is what actually executes the idea. So we might feel very motivated at times to have a nice schedule and make sure there's some good wellness practices, but it comes down to the discipline for us to be able to keep it in our daily practices. So, if we think about this idea of motivation versus discipline, it opens the door to this conversation about like, why don't we do behavioral change? Like, we know what it feels like to have a good day. We know what it feels like when things are in a sense of order that makes us feel like our best self, that we're living rightly. So, why is it that it feels like those days are so scattered or so random or so few and far between? Now, we can lean into the behavioral research here that really unpacks why we don't do behavioral change. So, to get it started, I want to share with you some of the principles of usually like why is it so hard to create behavior and patterns and routines and rituals that are going to support us. Now, the first thing that we talk about here is this idea that often sometimes when it comes to routines, we adopt what's called a fixed mindset. Right. So, for example, I'm not a morning person is a fixed mindset. I'm really disorganized is a fixed mindset. I lack willpower is a fixed mindset. I'm not disciplined enough is a fixed mindset. So if we're going to start changing our days to be able to feel more resilient, more balanced, more well, we need to adopt what's called a growth mindset, which says, I might not be a morning person yet. I might not be disciplined yet. And when we embrace this idea of yet, it suggests that the future can change. We're not fixed with some of these labels. They're things that can be adapted or we can grow and we can learn. So, first and foremost, we have to really play around with how we're speaking to ourselves. If you tell yourself you're not very structured or you never follow through, that's going to really hold you back. So, I haven't learned a way to follow through yet is going to help us get started. The second idea that I think people struggle with when they try to create routine or ritual or practice in their day that are going to promote resiliency and wellness is this idea that they lack clarity. They're not really sure what they should be doing or when they should be doing it or how they should be doing it. So, first and foremost, we want to make sure that you have a plan. You need to know what you're working towards. I often hear people say to me things like, Robin, I want to get healthy. Well, there's a lot of dimensions of health, and there's even more of wellness. So, where would we even begin? So, I want you to seek clarity. What are some key places that you think that would benefit you? So, for example, I'm a big advocate of having a solid morning routine. So, we're going to use that example to walk through this because the research supports the morning routine makes the difference. That is a great starting point for people. So, this idea about clarity, we need to know what time we're going to wake up. Now, I appreciate that might shift and flow and ebb based on your schedules, but you want to have some idea what is going to be your sleep windows. When are you going to sleep and when are you going to be awake? So, again, just starting with a consistent bedtime. Now, one of my very dear colleagues who studies behavior, Dr. Fergal O'Hagan, he shared with me an insight into sleep that I thought was so revolutionary. He said, Robin, people spend so much time worrying about what time they go to bed. What they need to think about is what time they wake up. Because when you start waking up at the same time, your body will do the work. Your body will re-engineer what times it wants to go to sleep based on what time you keep waking it up at. So think about what time you want to wake up as a start point. Now, the other kind of area why I see people struggle sometimes with routine and ritual that's going to help them with resiliency is the fact that there's not a lot of value addedness to some of the things that they're trying to change. Or perhaps there's no, the goal might be a little bit shallow, like it really doesn't make a big difference. So, again, for example, if we're trying to develop a morning routine, but you don't have like that clarity or understanding like why there's value addedness in there, it's hard to follow through. So you need to know the why. You need to know like, I want a morning routine because I want to start the day with good intention. I want to start the day with my feet grounded so I can have a good day. You got to see the value add. If you're just waking up at 6 in the morning for the sake of it, it's not going to stick. You want to make sure that there's value addedness. Now, another idea why people sometimes struggle is that they don't have a fallback plan or they're expecting perfection. There's not going to be days where we can continue. There will be days, where you won't be able to wake up at the same time or something is going to shift. We need to make sure that we're flexible. You need to know what that's going to look like and have a plan for it. So again, even if we can practice kind of like an 80-20-20 principle, 80% of the time we know what's going on, 20% we're open for flexibility and adaptability. It's going to serve us really well. And again, maybe starting to identify if, for example, my sleeping and my morning routine is shifted 2 or 3 mornings in a row, this is going to be my way to reset. So giving yourself some forethought as to how you're going to get yourself back on track. The next idea that I think happens sometimes is that we get distracted. We lose kind of the sense of why this matters. We lose kind of this routine or trying to build the value of this type of a ritual. So we want to make sure that we're distracted. Sure, that's going to happen, but we want to make sure we don't get too distracted that we lose sight of why we're doing this behavior. Now, the other thing that I see that sometimes gets in the way in folks when they're trying to change routine or create ritual is this idea about comfort versus discomfort. Now, if we're trying to build a morning routine, I assure you, if you just fell asleep, staying in bed is more comfortable than getting up, right? So we understand that there is this draw to be in our comfort places versus discomfort that's sometimes required when we're changing. Now, I really like this idea. You get to change and it's going to be uncomfortable. And if you don't change, it might be uncomfortable as well. So you have to pick your hard, pick what you're going to find that's something that's going to help you move forward. Now, another kind of area where people struggle with setting their goals and kind of getting into routines is this idea versus short-term versus long-term success. So in the short term, distractions, other things come up to play and they feel like they're more important. And then the long-term goal is so far away, we lose sight of it. So we want to make sure that we're making behavioral choices that are in line with where we're trying to get to. So again, we know people who have a morning routine seem to do better with resiliency. They're more mindful. They practice wellness. They're not being reactive as much to their day. So that's the long-term goal. Sure, there's going to be setbacks and challenges, but you want to keep your eye on that long-term goal. Now, the last thing that I think gets in the way is sometimes when we start to make behavioral changes and routines, we start to actually withhold things from ourselves. We actually kind of punish ourselves. So I see things like people start to experience this feeling of shortage or scarcity, or they're being kind of controlled into their patterns. What we need to understand is that anytime our brain cues us to a notion of scarcity or shortage, our natural tendency is to rebel. It's to go against it. So our language matters. So, for example, if we say, I have to get up early in the morning, our bodies are going to say like, oh no, we don't you dare tell me what I have to do. If we say, I get to get up in the morning, I get to practice a morning routine and some structure, it's actually going to feel like a privilege. It's going to be something that's going to help us move forward. So again, those are some of the things that kind of get in the way. But what I want to shift now is, okay, so what do we do, Robyne? Like, what can we put into practice? Now, when we think about any type of behavioral change, which is so important, is that we have to be clear. I don't want you to try and overhaul every area of your life at once. I want you to think about one practice that's clear, that you can explain it. You know exactly what that one thing is going to be. I'm going to develop a morning routine. Now, what we want to do is we want to make it actually as simple as possible. So we want to minimize some of the things that might get in the way of it. So again, structuring your environment where it's accessible. So let's say, for example, you want to go for a walk first thing in the morning. You got to make sure your shoes are at the front door. You got to make sure your coat is reachable. You got to make sure your AirPods are charged if you're going to listen to a music while you're walking, or a podcast or an audiobook. So again, it's making sure that all of those barriers that we know could derail us, we try to address them as quickly as possible. The other thing that's important about creating schedule and routine is it needs to be satisfying. This isn't a way to punish ourselves. This is this idea that these routines and these rituals are satisfying. They're bringing clarity and simplicity into our days. We have so many responsibilities on our plates. There are so many things that we're thinking about. We only have so much energy. So I want you to use your energy wisely. Another example I talk to folks often about is this idea by nighttime, they don't even have enough energy to decide what's for dinner. So even making out a meal plan could be a way to help lighten the cognitive load. So again, creating ritual and routine is a way to get that good work done. Now, when we think about these ideas about creating these routines and these rituals, one of the things that I often think about people could think about is this idea of making sure that the goals that we're putting in our today, that they have a soul. I want the things that you're working towards to bring this sense of peace, or this sense of service, or this sense of being well. Often we're kind of chasing some of these outcomes that are rooted in very kind of surface type behaviors. I want you to find things that really speak to how you want to feel. And when you think about setting goals, I want you to think about the feeling you want to achieve. So, for example, a morning routine really helps us feel solid. It helps us feel grounded. It helps us feel mindful, which then makes good decisions more available to us. So, I want you to think about, how do I want to feel? And what do I need to do to have more feelings like that? So, the idea here is feelings are more powerful than your thoughts. So not just thinking like, oh, it would be nice to be focused. I want you to take a moment to think about, what would it feel like to be focused? How would that add value to your day? Now, another way to think about some of these goals with the soul, and this is based on Danielle Lapointe's research, talks about this idea about finding ways that we feel like our most authentic self. And when we can align ourselves to our most authentic self, it's really going to give us a sense of meaning and purpose. So I want you to think about setting up some of these goals for yourself where it's not just based on external outcomes. I want you to think about inner attunement. So for example, maybe like doing a little bit less, but feeling more. Maybe it could be about less proving to others and more living, like really being present in the important work that you're doing as caregivers. Maybe it's that idea of present over perfect, a concept we've talked about in several of these segments. And the other one is maybe trying to think about how I want to feel in terms of energy. A lot of people are feeling very tired and wobbly and weary. We can set the intention that we want to feel better. Now, one of my favorite writers on behavioral science, his name is James Clear, and he wrote the book Atomic Habits. And he writes, every action you take is like a vote for the person you wish to become. Every behavior you make that's in alignment with those goals of how you want to be, how you want to feel, it's adding evidence that that is available to you. Another one that I really like is another writer. He's actually a sports writer. His name is Alistair McCaw, and he writes, big things happen when you do little things consistently. Consistency is key. I think that's something that's very important. And the last kind of little way of thinking about this to help ground our thinking is actually a quote that I have in one of my books that said, successful people and happy people are people who put away their shopping carts. And I know that seems, again, very small and very minute, but when you hold yourself to excellence in all of the little areas, when it comes to the big areas, you're going to do it right. And I've watched people struggle to put shopping carts on like little edges or up on curbs, or like I've seen them try to put them even in the wooded area behind Costco. Do things, the small things well. Do the small things well, create ritual and routine and rhythm where you're doing the little things with excellence. And this isn't, again, this isn't perfection. This is excellence. Hold yourself accountable and you will see the benefit of what that looks like, because you do the little things well and consistently with structure and that discipline, and the big things are going to fall into place. And then we'll have the space to practice the everyday resiliency that we're going to need when challenging seasons pop up. So thank you, merci, miigwech, and I'll see you in our next segment. Bye for now.